Well, welcome to the One Thing podcast, where we all get to usher in the age of humanity, Homo Spiritus, the new age of humanity, where we get to practice dancing with the one thing that individuals, communities, and countries have yet to try en masse. That one thing, as we say each episode at the top, is the connection to the higher self part of our true self anatomy that people call by various different names. Our prime directive above all else is to make and constantly return to tot connection, tot meaning the abbreviation for the one thing, day in and day out as our first step in dealing with life problems, rather than viewing life problems as things we can solve separately from tot. And in this episode, we are going to focus on practical ways to reset your source connection thermostat so you can become a better and better conduit for higher love, wisdom, and power more of the time. So I think we're going to start off with kind of a definition of thermostat, or a picture of the imagery of thermostats.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So as everyone knows, a thermostat is a device in a house or in an office or in a hotel room that keeps the temperature at a constant setting. So if the temperature gets too hot or hotter than that setting, the air conditioner goes on. If it gets cooler than that setting, the heating goes on. The thing about thermostats, though, is that they're dumb, meaning they don't decide what temperature to set themselves at. We do. And the same metaphor applies to thermostats that we have inside us psychologically and spiritually. So thermostats have no judgment as to the appropriateness of the setting we set them at. A thermostat just follows orders to control the atmospheric adjustment process. In our case, for this episode, our internal atmosphere adjustment process. And I think it's a beautiful metaphor for how to connect with source through how we set our own internal thermostat through the use of our own free will.
Perfect. And I would also add to that the purpose of our free will is to connect with our higher presence or the source of life. So it would be a typical thing for a human mind to say, oh, well, I'll set my own thermostat. And actually, it should be the source of life, or the one thing, whatever you end up addressing that as. That's where we should turn by use of our free will and ask, what is my thermostat setting? Teach me, show me, adjust me, that kind of thing. That would be the most appropriate use of our free will. And other ways of considering thermostat would be, we've heard these terms before, like upper limits. Like we always reach a certain point and then maybe we self-sabotage on purpose to come back down a little bit, or maybe we don't, we do it unconsciously, but there seems to be an upper limit on a lot of things, a lot of the aspects of our life. Another term that's used is glass ceiling. That's generally used for women in business and how high they can go as compared to men. And then there's also the set point, which is also used a lot in like weight loss and metabolic function. There's a specific set point that a body tends to be most comfortable at. Can we change our set point? We can. I mean, can we change it to be like, the model on the runway? Not sure if that's realistic, but we're not fixed in our set points, glass ceilings, upper limits, and thermostats as much as we think we are.
Mm-hmm. And some of the more common symptoms that tell us that our thermostat is set below optimal, or that tell us that our thermostat has kicked in to regulate us in ways that aren't helpful, are things like agitation, deadness or numbness, and physical discomfort.
Yeah, beautiful. Anytime we feel stuck, we could probably use an adjustment in our temperature. And another way is considering is that if we have too much of something or too little of something, we probably need a thermostat reset. I always say, and when assessing health for myself and others, is that usually the answer is to we need more of something or we need less of something. And so that's just one way to consider. If we know if we're eating too much sugar, we need to take away the sugar. You know, if we're drinking too much alcohol, we need to take away the alcohol. If we're not drinking enough water, we need to bring in more water. Those are thermostat settings too. And just a way of, thinking about how this idea, this analogy of thermostat settings can be across the board, even though we're really wanting to invite you to focus on the thermostat setting that you have with your higher self.
Yes, spot on. Yes, and I love that notion of lack or excess because it's so very aligned with traditional Chinese medicine, where there's an over energy or an under energy
Mm-hmm.
flowing through particular meridians that create imbalances in our being.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Yeah. And so the whole notion behind the metaphor of a thermostat is something that's called homeostasis. And homeostasis is basically a state of equilibrium. But the equilibrium may or may not be our optimal equilibrium. Our equilibrium is set however it's set. Often it's set through baggage, wound structure, old programming, whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
and it's set in a less than fully deliberate, free will, mindful kind of way. But once that setting is set, then the thermostat's job is to maintain homeostasis, to maintain whatever the temperature setting is, metaphorically. And that's what leads to the experience of suffering and tolerating it. Or another way of saying that is it may be hell, but it's home. So, it's our thermostat. Once it's set, it's what sets our comfort levels, how comfortable we are with happiness or with suffering, for example. It's what sets our radar, what we attract to us and what we repel from us. Um, and our unconscious thermostat is what calls forth quantum processes to enforce that thermostat setting.
Yeah, it's true. And actually, all of creation responds to our thermostat setting, right? So um, when we talk about where they're meant to be, it's why I really wanted to say initially that it's important to um, check in with our higher self and let ourselves be informed by that level of capacity to hold the vibration of love or hold more light or however you would actually envision that or see that. We tend to fall way short of what's possible for us. We have our thermostats are set way lower. If you imagine a bar, the bar for most of us could be way higher, but our bars are set on the lower side. I remember some years back getting a very clear visual. I was sort of in inquiry about all of this, and I don't know if you know those. It's a water sport. It's like this tube out the back of a boat and it jets water up and you stand on these feet things above that and you can be jet up into the water. And I kept seeing that. It's like that's what has to happen to move past this bandwidth of what we think our maximum potential is or what we think our thermostat is supposed to be set at. We're usually not correct if we're just coming from our mind's perspective. If we involve our heart, our soul, and our higher presence, well, then we get shown something different. And it might be a little awkward at first to sort of live into that. We think it's normal to have a low bar as our thermostat. It's not normal. It's familiar, as David said, it's
It's common.
comfortable, it's common, and it's comfortable, but it isn't normal. So we're just wanting to have this conversation so that you at least consider what other options you have when it comes to thermostat setting.
Yeah. And just to drive this home a step further before we get to the thermostat of thermostats, which is what we're really going to focus the bulk of this episode on, we first want to give you uh, three examples of kinds of internal thermostats that are really very common and easy to plug into. And for this kind of metaphor around thermostats, think about it in terms of real thermostats: too hot, too cold. The thermostat is set at a particular temperature. So each of these internal thermostats we're going to briefly touch on with you is on a spectrum of setting, often with extremes at either end. And the Goldilocks zone for that thermostat setting, the optimal thermostat setting, being in the middle, in between the two extremes. So the
Right.
first of those kind of everyday examples of internal thermostats is our stress thermostat continuum of settings. So at one extreme, we're ignoring extreme stress. And at the other extreme, we're engulfed by extreme stress. And in the Goldilocks zone between those two extremes, we're in a state of what's technically in psychology referred to as eustress, EUSTRESS, which is positive stress. It's an enlivened state of peace.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's other words for that too, like still point, active zero still point. It's a combination of extreme centeredness that has available to it both vitality and activity and rest and peace. So that's not the zone that includes anxiety and worry and doubt and fear and terror and all these other indulgences that we let ourselves you know have. It may sound a bit cold to say it that way, but we're really designed to live more in that Goldilocks zone, as David called it. Some philosophies call it the middle way, the middle path. I mean, these are not new to human beings trying to find the middle path, right? So the other example that we'll give is inner peace. So the continuum of settings, as David used in his stress example, would be at one extreme numbness, and we can see a lot of addiction maybe on this end because there's this there's this drive to just numb ourselves from what is causing us distress, which is the opposite of inner peace, right? And at the other end is agitation. That would be the other extreme. And of course, there are intensities of agitation. Some people kill people because they're so agitated. I mean, and then everything in between. So what we're looking for is that still point. And maybe you could refer to that as the calm waters, not the 10 feet high surf and not the nothing moving and it's just a cesspool of nothingness, right? But it's a lazy river. Actually, in Chinese medicine, our pulses are supposed to feel like a lazy river. Those would be like calm waters, so to speak. That would be the middle zone or the middle path or the Goldilocks zone.
Mhm. And one last example of everyday internal thermostats would be around love and intimacy. So the continuum of settings with love and intimacy, you have at one end, one extreme is counterphobic, meaning that we're avoiding love and intimacy. And at the other extreme is codependency, where we melt into someone else. We lose a sense of self and become over enmeshed is technically the psychological term for that kind of codependency. And the Goldilocks zone in between those two extremes is interdependent devotion to another person from a place of internal wholeness.
Right, and without losing oneself.
Exactly.
We hear this a lot from, even in our own experiences or from others. So that's a great way of seeing love and intimacy. And you can pick any subject like money or health or any of these important slices of a life pie, and it's the same idea in terms of a thermostat setting. So we just wanted to give you a couple of examples, but take any topic and same.
Yeah. Now let's work up to the heart of what we want to talk about with it, which is our source thermostat. And the way we'll kind of lay the foundation for talking about that starts with understanding about limiting paradigms. So what a paradigm is a self view and a world view that each of us has. And all limiting paradigms, all worldviews and self views that limit our love and our wisdom and our healthy capacity to have positive impact are built on a belief that we are separated from source. And our human mind has no idea how much we uh, reach, how much access we have into our higher self, into source, into our I am presence, or whatever other phrasing you want to use. We limit our source access basically at every turn, and we're programmed to do that in our cultures and society, by the media, by any number of different sources.
Yeah, it's so true. And we've never really been taught to consider the storyline that there is everything that we could possibly need from our higher presence, which is connected, which is the source of all life. So if the source of all life creates every particle of life and systems of worlds and multiverses, do you think that it could just dip in by your request and invitation and give you some life force to solve a problem or help you find a solution and that kind of thing? One of the accompanying storylines about this idea that our core wound or our core belief is that we're separate from the source of life is that God, let's just use that, or the divine or the sacred, has actually abandoned us because we somehow don't deserve God's gifts or grace or love or safety. Only a separated mind would project a story like that. So it's really important to go over and over in your own mind. I mean, I'm only speaking for myself. This is what I have to do still, but I've done it for a long time. That is a story. That is a projection. It is not true that the only way that I could be separated from the very energy that creates every molecule of each of our beings is if there is no way. I mean, we're all part of that. But if I am the one who turns away from it, then the suffering begins. And here's the greatest source of suffering for each of us as a human being. And it is this, that our divinity or that our higher presence has failed us and the world and has just abandoned life and everything we see. But the truth is, this is actually backwards or inside out because it's us, each of us, that have turned away from this divinity or source or God. And so what is the work then? Our work is to turn ourselves back and turn ourselves back. And not from the place of our own mind then saying what that should mean or look like, but from an empty place and then requesting to be shown by the Holy Spirit or by the higher presence or your higher self or wisdom, the higher mind. What does it actually mean to be so connected to the source of life that I no longer have to project this terrorizing wound of separation into every particle of my life?
Yeah. And well said. I mean, we all have our own different versions, our own different storylines, narratives about this. Like my storyline for the first 35 years of my life was I was here on earth as punishment, and the leftover from that I'm may finally be getting the upper hand on is the narrative that says I'm eternally and irreparably damaged. So, we want to encourage you to have the courage to discover what your version of that kind of storyline happens to be, because it may be very different from mine or from Lori's. And the thing that is important to keep in mind is that when we do start experiencing divinity, our higher self, source, our I am presence, our fear of unworthiness is sometimes replaced by the opposite extreme again. You've got these two polarities. So the opposite extreme of that unworthiness is our ego, um, feeling fearing being engulfed or overwhelmed, right? So if we open up to fully experiencing divinity, that our unworthiness will be replaced by a form of annihilation, that
Right.
the annihilation of the ego self.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of an upper limit or a thermostat or a set point. Like we can't go too far into that. But if we do it little by little, if you ask your higher presence to just take you one step at a time at a pace and an amount that feels doable for you so you don't feel engulfed, then you'll start feeling and trusting and being able to sort of touch into what the tipping of the scales. And then we just wanted to offer one more thing to be aware of, that when those scales do start tipping and you start realizing, oh, I guess the universe does have my back. And, there is this sort of protective light that follows me everywhere I go. And, there's so many ways that you might see this. It's going to be different for all of us. Um, then you're going to have to sort of just recognize that when the ego, when the lower human mind really gets that there's the tipping of the scales, it might throw a tantrum, or it might just, well, that's the best way to say it, is it might throw a tantrum because it's really it doesn't know who it will be with, if it's going to get annihilated by the light of life or light of love. It fears the death of its alleged, autonomy and self-importance, really, is in arrogance, even though it's killing itself with it. AKA, we're killing ourselves with the allowance of that. So just play with that part too, as you're tipping your scales and having experiences that you consciously invite to experience more and more of the acceptance of this source of life.
Mhm. And what I'll amplify about that is, and I think you've said it perfectly about what's really going on, that this is our ego being terrified. And yet, what we often say when this is going on is that we're afraid that we won't know who we are, that our sense of identity will completely unravel, that we'll be totally lost. And that's simply because we've forgotten that we are not our ego. So it's easy to fall into that kind of belief and wording when we forget temporarily that we're not our ego.
Right.
So this leads us then to the heart of what we wanted to cover with you in this episode, which is the tot thermostat. It's kind of like the master thermostat, the thermostat of thermostats. So in a sense, it's the tot of tot, the thermostat of thermostats of the one thing. And the importance of this is something that we can't underestimate, because Lori and I believe that this thermostat of thermostats, dealing with this, resetting this, is really the only real way to change our upper ceiling on the amount of everything that's about well-being and love and wisdom and healthy impact that we're all about as Homo spiritus beings. And there are two key aspects of this thermostat of thermostats, this tot of tot. So Lori's going to cover the first one and I'll cover the second.
Perfect. So Before I say what that first one is, it's something just dropped in, which is it's important to acknowledge that in in um, in this particular time in human and collective consciousness, we've never had as much light, light, force at one time uh, ever compared to now. And so what that does is it causes a pressure of light, a pressure of this life force that we're all made up of, right? We could call it cosmic light substance. We could call it starlight. I mean, there's any number of ways we could parse that out. But it makes things difficult if we're not tending this piece, right? If we're not tending our own thermostat and our own connection to our higher presence, because this pressure builds up, and then it's challenging if it has to burst in ways that cause more suffering, right? We can actually do it with more grace when we little by little lift our glass ceiling, so to speak, or more and more connect to the higher presence to be shown how to actually do this. Otherwise, it can be a bit much. So, and this is a perfect lead into the access, the source of life access, in terms of the continuum of settings. So on the one end of the continuum, there's terror or opposition at one extreme, and that we're going to usurp with our ego, lower human mind, the God force, right? and that actually is, we're seeing a lot of that. I think that when we talk about this light pressure, this light force that's coming in that's causing pressure, it's forcing us to see, because now everything is being brought to, when you turn a light on in the room, we've said this before, you see everything. If the light's not on, it's dark and you don't know what's going on, and you can kind of just go, that room's okay, and walk on by down the hall. But when the light gets turned on, you see everything, and that's what's happening on the planet right now. And so when a human being chooses to stay in his or her small mind and chooses to continue to turn away from the source of life, this is homo machina. This is how we will observe, for those of us who choose otherwise, we will observe a certain portion of the population going down that path. And on the other end of the spectrum is the choice to connect on the regular, and to be in that Goldilocks zone where we're not shackled by lack and limitation that comes with comes with usurping the higher energy of life, right? And then this way we have this lovely fluid connection. And this is what we're calling Homo Spiritus. This is what we're inviting those of you who this resonates for to practice, so that you have this fluidity and this connection and this capacity to raise your thermostat by conscious curation.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And the second part of this core tot thermostat is it's about self-sovereignty, the kind of self-sovereignty that's only possible in tot connection. And so the continuum of settings with self-sovereignty is, at one extreme, we have abdication or victimhood instead of self-sovereignty. And at the other extreme, we have arrogance and controlaholism instead of self-sovereignty, where the Goldilocks zone between those two dysfunctional extremes is unquestioned and unquestionable self-sovereignty that serves us all, is how I soundbite it that way.
Yeah.
And so this combination of ongoing, unfiltered I am connection, the Homo Spiritus state that manifests in the world as self-sovereignty that serves us all, that is the tot of tots, the tot of tot in terms of the Goldilocks zone, the ideal thermostat setting for us to aspire to, that if we, the more we are in alignment with that, the more all of our other thermostat settings, our more everyday worldly thermostat settings, will much more easily recalibrate themselves to their optimal Goldilocks zones as well.
Yes, beautiful. And for those who are so keen and ache to help the world be a better world, this is the place to start. If we try to make the world better without this connection, then we're just, and we've said this before in previous episodes, we're just going to be recycling the old energy. It might look a little different. It's just like a different set of clothes, but it's the same thing, right? So it's really important to recognize how vital and imperative this piece is. And so let's just talk about a few ways to reset your thermostat. Are you going to talk about? Oh, we don't have it in here, do we? Okay, so
Yeah,
one of the books that you might want to consider reading is the
I
book.
do. It's
Oh,
it's in
you.
the takeaways.
Oh, oh, it's down there. Okay, got it. Sorry, my bad. Okay, so a couple of ways to reset your thermostat, your tot thermostat. This is the one thing, right? Whatever that address is to pray. And not from this victim place, but from a conversational place. I'm constantly doing this and telling people, talk to this part of yourself like it is he or she is your best friend. You know, you're going to sit down and have a cup of tea or grab a beer or a glass of wine, and you're going to just speak things like you would normally to someone that you care about and you know cares about you. Then make some requests like I need some help with this. Please show me the way. This is an elevated way of praying. You know, we've been indoctrinated into prayer where it's sort of like this begging thing, and that doesn't really get us anywhere good. So don't leave prayer out if you do happen to resonate with prayer, and just, you know, ask for ways from your higher self to elevate the way in which you speak to this higher anatomy part of yourself. The other way you can do it to raise your tot thermostat is by journaling. Notice, you know, make an account of where things are too far on one end of the spectrum or too far on the other end of the spectrum, and then ask in your journaling where your sweet spot is, where that Goldilocks zone is for you, and you know that energy moving out from the confused, tangled webs of your mind down your arm and into your journal. There's power and there's healing and there's transformation that research shows exists in that experience. And then the other one that I personally love quite a lot is a creative process. You know, engaging in a creative process with intention, just like journaling, but it includes visuals and imagery and words and colors and things that kind of get past our conscious minds, which our conscious mind tends to have gates to them that doesn't want to let us pass. But if we engage in a creative way, then we can get past those gates and it drops us into our subconscious, and we can make some pretty significant changes and shifts that way. And on one of my websites, createtohealstudio.com, there's a lot of resources there. Some of them are free. Most of them are modestly priced. If you like the Sketchbook Studio, for example, is a way to just journey in your life in a creative way that's very personal and private to you. There's also a book on that site that you can get for free or modest at Amazon if you don't want to read it on a PDF, The Art of Returning to Love. It goes into great detail about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, not only in this episode, but in a lot of our episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very juicy stuff. And I'll be putting the link to createtohealstudio.com in our show notes.
Perfect.
And then another option is a procedure that I've taught called the thermostat reset procedure. And this is a pretty simple, straightforward procedure. I'm just going to kind of walk you through a description of it very briefly. And if you like it, you can re-listen to this part of the recording and click pause after each step in order to implement the step. So what you do is you pick a thermostat that you want to reset. Hopefully it's one of the top thermostats, right? And then you do an initial rating. Where are you currently on that thermostat continuum? with that particular thermostat.
Like on
And
a scale of 1 to 10?
you can do it on a scale
Oh,
of 1 to 10, where 10 is the maximum
most intense.
alignment,
Yeah.
or you can do the continuum where the Goldilocks zone is in the middle,
Ah,
and you're rating how far off from the middle in one toward one extreme or the other you start at.
oh, good clarification. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, and then what you do from there is take a sheet of paper and draw a vertical line down the middle of the piece of paper, so you have two columns, and one column at the top, you'll just label each column. It doesn't matter which is first and which is second, but one of the two columns will be about your objections to embodying your ideal thermostat setting with that particular thermostat, or the risks you think you might be taking if you elevated your thermostat setting or lived in the Goldilocks zone with that thermostat setting. And then the other column would be the prices you will continue to pay if you stay at whatever your current setting is with that thermostat setting. Once you've got both of those lists really fully fleshed out, and don't censor it. I mean, anything that crosses your mind as a possible risk or a possible price, write it down, right? So you've got two complete lists. And then as you have that piece of paper in front of you, just start tapping the side of your hand to the side of your hand. You're really tapping the karate chop point, if you know where that is. It's right here. It's at the end of the in palmistry. Is
Well,
that the lifeline or the
I
heart
think so.
line?
If you make a loose fist, the biggest crevice will be where that point is.
Right. It's
And
either the heart line or the lifeline in palmistry. And in acupuncture, it's small intestine 3, right?
yeah, that's right.
Third point on the small intestine meridian. So in order to be sure to get it, you just tap the sides of your hands together, and you do that firmly, but not so hard that you're creating pain for yourself. And as you keep tapping together, what you're focusing on is holding both sets of lists inside yourself with grace, so that you become larger than both risks. And what you're asking for as you're tapping is, and you're asking this of your higher wisdom, is for your thermostat to be reset into the Goldilocks zone.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
and once you've done that for 30 seconds, maybe to a minute, then re-rate your where you are on that thermostat at that point. And if for some reason you notice that there are no shifts, well, let's say you notice a shift, but it's not all the way, just do it again.
Mhm.
And keep repeating until you're more in that zone. Now, this is a simple first aid thing. There's a much more complicated version of the thermostat reset procedure, but that goes beyond anything we can cover in this episode. But at the end of the process I just described, the final step is to re-rate where you are. And if there are no shifts that have happened, or if you notice that there are shifts that happen temporarily, but they don't hold over time, usually what that means is that there's more harvesting work to do, meaning that there's baggage that you're carrying that needs to be cleared away to a greater extent than it's already been cleared away, in order for this kind of simple procedure to really produce durable results.
And will you have a resource available to the listeners in the show notes as well for going farther into that?
Well, there is a more expanded version of this, a very in-depth training actually in this, in my Super Change Catalyst membership program.
Okay.
And so what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to the information about Super Change Catalysts.
Perfect. And just to clarify, when we're rating our current and ideal, we're rating, when we say ideal, we're wanting to put on that list like who we would be, how would life be. We're not looking for a number like 72 degrees, right? We're looking for a description of who we would be. Who do we want to live into? And then, of course, if things stay the same, like what would that, what would be what was the word you used? If things stay the same, then there's the consequences to that,
Right. The
right?
prices that you'd continue to pay.
Right. That's how you said it. So we're clearly stating that, right? Yeah. I
Exactly.
mean, you were clear, but I just wanted to make sure because I thought, oh, someone
Thank
might
you.
see it a different way.
Great.
So let's talk about just a few of our takeaways from this episode. It's a juicy topic. So the thing that we're inviting you into and we're asking you to take away from this conversation is to become more aware of your one thing higher self settings, right? So, this is the settings about your capacity to be the instrument of more and more of this source, life, light, force self, and your self sovereignty. Sovereignty is not like being controlling over, like David mentioned earlier. That's the confusion of the lower human mind. Sovereignty is being able to thrive in the world, not based on systems, not based on worldly systems as much as our how we are fed by the fabric of the universe, which is love. Now, that might sound a little wacky and out there, and how could that ever be? But just ask your higher self to show you what that actually means for you. And then self sovereignty will come into clearer and clearer focus for you, and you'll realize it's not about victim, it's not about arrogance, it's not about overbearing or underbearing. It's about this center point that has everything you need, everything you require and desire to have a lovely life.
Exactly. So that's the first takeaway that we want to leave you with. The second is try any of the reset options that we just covered with you that you resonate with experimenting with, whether it's prayer or journaling or a creative process, or the thermostat reset procedure, the simple version that I just went over. Any of the ones that you resonate with, just start experimenting with those for resetting your thermostat of thermostats.
Perfect. And you can also do your thermostat settings as David taught with the lists on the two sides of the page in a visual journal. So you could double up.
That's
And
beautiful.
oh yeah, here's what I was thinking we
Yeah.
were missing is that Gay Hendricks has written a book, Hendrix is his last name, called The Big Leap. And he explains in very beautiful detail how to move past our upper limits. It can be in small leaps, medium leaps, big leaps. The name of the book is Big Leap, but he outlines all the ways that we sabotage our capacity to do this. And so he'll teach in this book how to keep expanding beyond our limits, even when we feel afraid to do so.
Hmm. Yep. Beautiful resource. So, and if you are listening to this podcast episode and you are a Super Change Catalyst member, or you want to become one of the many master classes, as I mentioned earlier, that are included is on thermostat sovereignty, how to take charge of a wide range, over 20 different thermostat settings, with the two key thermostat settings being these two that we're talking about today, about source connection and self sovereignty. Yeah.
Beautiful, great resource. And then the last takeaway we would ask you to consider is to remember that resetting your thermostat with the source of life, with the one thing, and your capacity to accept more of that part of yourself into your mind, body, and life is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. It's not a flip of a switch. It's okay, today I'm gonna just be present and aware and see where I'm getting stuck and tight, and then ask for the connection and the reset, right? And some days will be better than others, and it will all be okay because you're continuing to be engaged in the process.
Right. I do need to make one correction because I had two different Hendrixes confused.
Oh,
It's actually Harville Hendrix, whose last name is spelled
oh,
Hendrix.
you're
Gay
right.
and Kathleen Hendrix,
Is
their last name is spelled Hendricks.
That's right. That's right. So and honestly, if you go to Amazon and put in the Big Leap, you'll find it. But just so you have the knowing that it's Gay Hendricks. So great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Next episode is going to be about how to access higher love and wisdom by connecting with the one thing. This is why, we want to raise our thermostat so we have access to these divine qualities that we all ache for, but they sometimes seem to be out of reach. So until next time, remember to dance with your better half, the one thing, so you can keep living a more full and lively and joyful life as Homo Spiritus.